Cyprus, the Counterintelligence Podcast, hosted by IXN Solutions, the company you turn to for corporate counterintelligence expertise and creators of 351X.
And we're live. Ryan Rambo, good afternoon on a Saturday.
Good afternoon, Jeremy. It's a Saturday. I have my Saturday beverage and really looking forward to this conversation. Oh, everybody else does too. So Jeremy, what's going on in the news these days?
Yeah, well, you know what's happening in Iran. I find it interesting. Iran is now faced with a counterintelligence problem. You know, the past couple of days, it's been reported out of Dubai. There's been 500 arrests of accused individuals giving information to the enemies of Iran. So think Israel. But I mean, what better way to demonstrate counterintelligence failure at large when agnostic to what country, there's 500 people being arrested. Look at the impact it's playing in the Middle East. These 500 individuals who are giving information to another country ultimately destroyed 4 potential new leaders of Iran. For the good, I have no love for Iran whatsoever, given the number of soldiers they killed when we were in the Middle East, and that's U.S. soldiers. But boy, I think it clearly demonstrates, Ryan, the impact counterintelligence can have. And Iran's finding out too late because of the war zone torn area going on right now.
Yeah, and you know, we always preach about taking proactive measures from a counterintelligence standpoint. You don't want to lose your country because you failed to do counterintelligence before things kicked off. So good point. A lot of news coming out from Iran. We're in the 4th week of epic fury. So I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. I just hope that everybody stays safe who's in theater right now.
Yeah, agreed. And if our audience out there wants to give the article a read, it's from the Dubai newsroom. It was published on 15 March 2026. Again, it's interesting. The title, Iran arrests 500 accused spies of giving information to the enemies. But Ryan, before you go ahead and introduce our guest, I just want to give a quick shout out to our friends and sponsors over at Red 5 Security. Risk doesn't announce itself. I mean, it's everywhere in the news. The simple article we talked about. It builds quietly and suddenly over time until a crisis hits. Today's show is brought to you by Red 5 Security, specialist in proactive threat monitoring using behavioral indicators and real-world intelligence to identify danger before it escalates. Boy, Iran needed that, I think, Ryan, right? I'm glad they didn't have it. But because when threats go unseen, decisions get dangerous and leaders shouldn't be left in the dark. So again, shout out to Red 5. For our audience out there, give their website a check out, red5security.com. But Ryan, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guests?
Yeah, we've got a very special event. It's our United States Marine Corps Counterintelligence and HUMINT panel. Now, we've done this in the past with U.S. Army, CW5 panels and others. And it's just a collective group, you know, of experts in their field to talk about topics that are relevant to them. And so we've already gone through all of their backgrounds. We've had them on individually to tell their story, so we don't have to dig into that. We can go straight into Q&A and really start talking about it. So who's on our panel today? Well, we have Dan Williams. If you want to check out his episode, he was on episode 90. We have Damon Mathews, who was on episode 95, told his story. Mike Houle was episode 40. He was our first Marine that we ever had on the show. So a celebratory moment with that. And Nick Vidulich, did I pronounce that right? I have such a hard time pronouncing your last name, Nick. Help me out.
You and everybody else, Ryan. It's Vidulich.
Vigilant. Okay, Vigilant. Mine's so bad, man. But you were on episode 106, another great story. So great backgrounds, guys. But if you would, just to catch our audience up, we'll go around the horn, starting with Dan, and just talk about your counterintelligence career and what you're doing now. And you're on mic. You're on mute.
There we go. Yeah, Dan Williams. I spent 20 years in the Marine Corps. 16 of it was counterintelligence. Retired back in 2015, and then I've been building Silicon Valley security programs at Uber, Lucid Motors, Gilead, and now Intuit, where I'm currently at.
Awesome. Damon, you're up next.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Jeremy. Damon Mathews, retired Chief Warrant Officer, did 20 plus years in the Marine Corps, retired back in January of 23. and I'm currently the Deputy Director for National Security Operations at QIntel.
Awesome. Mike?
Yeah, Mike Houle did just over, 14 years in the Marine Corps. Went out to support the community as a contractor for quite a long time. Went in and out of the corporate world, and right now I'm supporting Space Force intelligence.
Awesome. Last but not least, Nick.
Nick Vidulich. So I did 22 years in the Marine Corps, did 5 active and then 17 reserves. And now I am the Director of Security and Business Operations for Law Federal. We're a small SAG company out of Colorado.
That's awesome. So many great heroes on the channel. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I wish people could have heard us talking before, because the banter was already starting to get spicy. A lot of jokes. I love Marines. They always bring their sense of humor with them. So we reached out to our audience and we asked them to, come have some audience participation, give us some questions for our guests. So that we can give them a shout out and allow you to answer some of the things that they've been thinking about from this perspective. So I'm not going to lie, the first question was from me. And so I posted the first question, but I think it's a good one. And let's just roll right into it. So we all train counterintelligence and HUMINT professionals. This podcast is an extension of our training platform. I mean, we're trying to constantly, mature and professionalize the CI force. But what counterintelligence or HUMINT skill is most difficult to teach young collectors today, and why? And so with that question, I'll toss it over to Damon. He was first off the mic.
And I didn't know that was going to be the buzzer on Family Feud. Who's going to be first off the mic? But now I know the rules. First, given recent events, and Ryan brought up jokes, so I'll say, remember the boogeyman at night checks under his bed for Chuck Norris before he goes to sleep. So,
Rest in peace.
Cheers to that.
Yeah. So, I will tell you, I think the hardest thing to teach is how to mix the science and the art right together. The art aspect of our craft, we've seen it, at the schoolhouse and real world locations. There's a small window, I think, where book smarts, street smarts, GT score, comprehension of the two things mixing together, et cetera, all kind of line up. From a science perspective, you can probably think of, folks throughout your careers that were really good at like the high end technical stuff, right? Like really good TSEM guys, or really good polygraph guys, or really good CI and cyberspace, kind of folks. And those are normally the ones that were, really book smart, right? And had GT scores 125 plus, probably had a 99 on the ASVAB, that kind of stuff, right? But they lacked a little bit of that interpersonal, skills and the art portion. And then, from an art perspective, we've probably all seen the guys in the last 20 years in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. We're on the other end of that spectrum that, would run and gun in some terrible places doing tactical MCC or interrogations, and usually high, street smart IQ, but lower on the GT score end, and struggled right with the more technical, bigger picture, aspect of it. And then there's that sweet spot in between, right, that we always tried to, assess and select and find, folks that fit in there. But, there's an art and a science to that in and of itself. So I think the hardest part broadly is teaching the difference between the science and the art portion, and then applying those two things together. That intangible thing is hard to teach. It's hard to evaluate. And now, given the current, environment where folks aren't getting real world reps and sets anymore, and places like Syria, Iraq, or Afghanistan, because you used to be able to close that gap by doing some of that stuff, real world, right? And teaching, OJT kind of on the job teaching and giving those corrections. You can't do that now. That plus the current dynamic, current generation, right, is more technical social than like human interaction social, right? So I think there's a deficit there from how they interact with humans already and how they're raised, right? They're so tied to technical stuff. It's hard to get them to pay attention to the more street smart, craft art piece of that. So I think there's a bigger deficit there. So for me, I think that's probably the hardest thing to teach, and it probably spans the gambit of, functions that we do at our job.
Yeah, I broadly speaking agree with that. I think, I came in, to peek behind the curtain. You gave us some questions beforehand, so these aren't surprises. I came in wanting to talk about a lot of where CI human professionals, intelligence professionals generally speaking, but CI human professionals particularly, where they fit in, and teaching them how they fit into the intelligence cycle and the ops cycle, and where they fit into how a unit or how a military works. And it's something I think the Marine Corps does really well and really poorly, kind of both at the same time, because we're a Latin movable in the MOS. You have young collectors have some exposure across the service. They have hopefully some sort of operational experience, and the goal is to bring that in and make that applicable to now doing CID. And to Damon's point about that golden hour of the spot between art and science, I think it's very much the same thing. It's a maturity. It's an understanding of where you kind of fit in the world. That is that thing that I think it may be impossible to teach. I think it's something that grows from the school of hard knocks, where you realize that, like, me as the lonely CI human guy out, doing whatever it is that I'm doing, we often think that our particular mission is like the core of why an entire MU or something like that is in support of us. In the meantime, we're doing risk management for a commander, right? And recognizing, being able to hang up your own ego, or being able to recognize that maybe I'm not as good at talking as I thought I was, or maybe I'm not as bright as I thought I was, right? Like, so much of this job is, I think, centered, like, if you want to be good at it, is centered on kind of emerging from humility. And to that, to your point, Damon, about like some of those folks that were running and gunning and sometimes just weren't quite ready to put it away. I think a lot of that was not growing and not being humble and not recognizing, your own flaws and your own weaknesses, and not working on that, or not trying to pivot into some way to make that better for the whole. So teaching it, I don't know. I like exposure therapy. I like a school of hard knocks where somebody's not getting blown up or shot at as much as possible. But I'm not sure. I think that's the hardest thing for particularly young collectors to learn.
Yeah, just to echo off of what you said, Nick, and Damon as well. The point that we're not, Marine Corps is not getting as many reps as they used to. That used to be a quick way to spin up some maturity of an individual, not only in their Marine Corps time, but their CI human profession. There was opportunities probably out of neglect from other entities for us to grow up in that environment. Going to the places that we get sent often leads to opportunities that we wouldn't normally get. On the technical piece, I'm in full agreement that we're seeing people that are more tech social based than they are face to face these days. I haven't noticed a significant change to the Marine Corps population in terms of what that ends up as a pool of individuals that we can take into the community. I have, going back in my career working with CHEP in teaching CHEP across the Marine Corps, I did find that from the time I started heavily with CHEP to the time I left that program, I did see a marked increase of technical capability inside of our community. What that led to was different lines of operational thinking that I didn't see at the very beginning of my career, at least, in the straight leg Marine Corps, in terms of the things that they could do to get after the problem. I think looking at who our adversaries are going to be in the future, I think we're trending in the right direction with that. I don't think we're losing a whole lot for what we're gaining and embracing that technical aspect of the job. But of course, that assumes that we're going to have to continue to have the same size of pool of individuals that understand the art before the science. So.
Well, I mean, I'm about 10 years removed from the whole thing. So, what I can say on a commercial side, bringing in young people that we're training to become, intelligence analysts for companies across Silicon Valley and other locations. Personality is huge in that function because of the cross-functional nature of the work with HR, legal, other different stakeholders. We need people that are personable. And I think, the same goes when it comes to CI HUMINT training. It is a component. Your likability is a component of the training, and it's a component of your success afterwards. Where you go and what you do is really a little bit by luck, but a lot of it is who you know and what they think about you. And I think with the young people, the hardest thing probably to teach them right now is the inauthenticity of being what somebody else needs you to be for you to be successful versus who you want to be, because they value transparency, they value individuality. It makes it a little bit harder to conceive like, oh, I'm lying. No, you're just being what the other person needs.
Yeah, well said, gentlemen. I have a follow-up question, but before I do that, a statement. Science and an art, Damon, you play after my heart, the art of assessment, right? And I think that's not just external to the sources or the assets that we run, understanding why they do the things that we ask them to do, but it's self-reflection. What do I have the skills to be able to do? If I can't do one of the 5 functions of counterintelligence, and I'm just going to say surveillance, for instance, because I can't, I need to know that about myself and be able to recognize that and then tell people I'm just not strong in it. And then human on top of that. So self-reflection, I really do think it comes down to that. Great answers, gentlemen. But my follow-up question would be, how do you close this gap with no more deployments out there, no really OJT out there doing it in an area where it's actively collecting? How do you close this gap? And Damon, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I gave General Berger, right, the answer when he came down to Tampa one time to visit before I retired, and told him at the time, kind of set him up, right, of like, hey, you don't do this with pilots, right? If you send a pilot through flight school, he doesn't sit in a hangar somewhere until, war with Iran, pops off, and then you expect him to start flying. Like, no, he's got to get reps and sets and fly and hours and all of that. So CI HUMINT guys aren't any different, because they were trying to close down, all the rotational forces that we had through the CENTCOM AOR. The Marine Corps kind of broke up with its Middle East girlfriend and was, trying to pivot towards the Pacific. And we told him, like, listen, it's not the same environment. You can't do and get the reps and sets that you can in the Middle East that you can get by sitting over in Hawaii or Okinawa or some other place, waiting for something to take place. Just not the same environment. So if you don't get those reps and sets there, where are you going to get them? He was like, well, I guess they just won't get them unless you can find some place at home or in the Indo-PACOM AOR, to get them. And I will tell you, the Indo-PACOM AOR hasn't changed, so that's still not a great option. But at home, there are plenty of counterintelligence threats to get after related to the Department of War as a whole or the Marine Corps. I mean, look at what General Hale did, over with Army Counterintelligence Command, and those guys looking to get authorities to move off base, right, and be able to get after some threats, from start to finish. I will tell you, the Marine Corps should not wait to get after threats. until it's too late. They have plenty of people sitting around now, and they can get those reps and sets with plenty of things going on here right at home, bases, stations, installations, and tech protect and other things that the Marine Corps needs to worry about to be able to do that thing when something does happen in the future. So I think that is the answer. Instead of sitting around waiting to be an assigned force, right, to a joint force commander, the service has responsibilities and equities it should get after and get after soon.
So I could not agree more, right? Especially counterintelligence professionals need to get the reps in. And we have a target-rich environment, given the fact that we have approximately 1 billion defense contractors that need better, more robust, more regular counterintelligence engagement with the government. I think, right, I've worked with DCSA for a lot of years now. I really respect what their mission is and with the CI professionals that work with DCSA in particular, and there are just not enough of them. And DCSA and all of the services, and they're all underwater. And what you have just in the active Marine Corps component is a bunch of eager, competent, credentialed counterintelligence professionals that can be out there augmenting the domestic force. Now, it's not the most sexy mission in the portfolio. And I think this is part of the reason why ultimately industrial security is underfunded and underappreciated, is that it's so terribly boring, which is fine. That's how you get your reps in, right? You don't go into the weight room and start squatting 500 just like tomorrow, right? You have to work up to it. You have to do it in a safe environment. You have to do it in a permissive environment. You have to do it. You have to get the skills right. That said, right? Like I'm gonna, as I talk about this, and I'll set the ground rule and assumption here that we're not talking in a world in which, right, we have to consider the arduous process of like adjusting our authorities and things like that, because this should be prefigured. If we should imagine a world in which we imagine the world we want to exist in, and then try and like move towards that. Because I'll tell you right now, every single time that an NCIS person has said, or a senior collector has said, "Oh, that's outside of your authorities," is ringing in my ears when I hear Damon talking about how we should be getting our reps and sets in, and I appreciate that. And there's a way forward through that, and I don't like. That's boring for me. Like I'm boring myself just talking about it, and so that's not something I think that we need to talk about in here. But we should recognize that, like, counterintelligence professionals have abused counterintelligence authorities domestically before, and so there's a reason that separation of powers exists, and B, that the authorities question is like every single time you make any argument about doing anything, it's going to come back down to two things, and it's going to be, well, three things: risk, authorities, and money, and that's untenable for most.
Well, and I think that's interesting because, one of the unique things about the Marine Corps from an outsider looking in is that you have embassy guards at every U.S. embassy across the globe. And I mean, even though, it may not be sexy, but you could still send, in my mind, your CI HUMINT teams out anytime you want to go do that engagement with them, TDY status. So, I mean, so at least they're getting feet on the ground. They're meeting people at the embassy. They're doing their rounds and exercising those muscles. And I think you could probably do that all the time. You wouldn't even have to worry about being domestically in the States and have those authorities. You would just do that naturally over in an overseas environment. Am I way off on that?
No, I don't think
so.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we're in complete. I don't think so. Again, it's risk or it's money.
Yeah, right. And I think to Nick's point, right, when he brought up the authority piece, and I think you guys saw the article as well, but somebody posted a while back about, hey, who's a member of the Intel community? I think it was actually a post about NCIS, believe it or not, and how they were saying, hey, we're not a member of the, Intel community for a reason. But it's interesting on the authorities piece. I mean, if you look at Title 10, Title 50, and Executive Order 12333, it directs the Marine Corps to conduct counterintelligence activities. It doesn't say like may or should. It says shall, right? So from a statutory and from an executive order standpoint, like the Marine Corps is tasked with doing counterintelligence activities. And nowhere in any of those three does it differentiate between CONUS or OCONUS, right? It just says like you shall. Now, internally, right, and in the family, the Department of Navy can, play fisticuffs on, what the SecNav instruction means when it definitely puts those things in different bins. But it's hard to alleviate that statutory and executive order responsibility to do those things, because at the end of the day, if something happens to a Marine Corps equity or person or base or installation, I can guarantee you it'll be a Marine Corps officer that's sitting on the Hill testifying about it. So at the end of the day, if you can't say yes, you can't say no, right? And you can delegate tasks, but you can't delegate risk or responsibility. So if at the end of the day, you still own that risk and responsibility and you have tasked authority to do it, right, under statutory and executive order, I couldn't find a good reason why I wouldn't be doing it, CONUS or OCONUS. But I think that's a longer discussion, right, for a later day, and maybe more bourbon and maybe even an interagency council to have that discussion.
Yeah, that'd be a fun one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and directly responding to your question about MSG, of course, they have CI embedded at the schoolhouse. They have the ability to take in reporting from those embassies. I think it just comes down to resource allocation. We're sitting here having an argument about getting reps during peacetime, but at the same time, and people other than myself who are on this panel probably have more experience in those meetings, but there's always going to be a centralized argument for the Marine Corps to keep our elements as close hold instead of farming them out everywhere. And most likely because of the way we operate as a service, right? At Nations 911, anywhere in the world within 72, 96 hours, self-supportive. Like we want to keep those, at least the argument typically is we want to keep those forces close hold and ready to go. So I know there's been discussion at MSG. A personal friend of mine used to be counterintelligence over there. I know they are looking at some system. Damon, you may even have more insight on this, but trying to farm out CI HUMINTers out to the embassies in a structured way to help keep up their proficiency and also support a lot of the collection that's being done out there.
Yeah, I definitely, heard about it, and we've definitely, it was no original thought, right? If you go back some years, we definitely did this in the past. And I think things just kind of come up right over time. But that's also a hard environment, right? Like ambassadors, chiefs of station, right, and others, defense attaches are going to have very low risk tolerance for rotational elements, coming in on a short duration and doing anything of real long-term value, right? That's a hard conversation to get in, I think, from an activity standpoint, because we'll probably wander out of the classified space pretty quick, but it also goes back to the risk and responsibility category, right? Of like, you remember when Rumsfeld was, Secretary of Defense, right? He was known for kind of headbutting, right, the interagency on things from a DoD standpoint. And he's not wrong, right? At the end of the day, statutorily, anything, he has, folks inside the DoD do from a CI or HUMINT standpoint, nobody else can say no except for the president, right? But there's some, definite other things at the end of the rainbow, right? If you escalate that, and somebody once told me pole vault over mouse turds, right? So if you're gonna burn down a relationship, right, with a embassy and a chief of station and other stuff, there are ripple effects right across the interagency in doing that. So that's a hard mountain to get over, right? In a wide swath, right? Like onesies and twosies may get through based off of personality and relationships and may get some good stuff done. But other times there's very low risk, right, or appetite for that. And it's a hard thing to do and a hard kind of, hump to get over with those past lessons learned. And a soft kind of community has that same issue at times. So it's a difficult thing to get out there and do that. It's not as easy as, just saying it. I mean, it briefs well, but there are some AORs that are way easier than others. Maybe Europe probably a little easier to get in and do some of that stuff. Middle East probably, but like Africa, Indo-PACOM, right, and some others, that's hard. There's just no appetite.
Yeah, I don't have any deep thoughts on all of that, but like for your original question about how to keep the skills hot, I mean, there's all kinds of things people can do that, at one point I got my real estate license and started selling houses on the side because I figured if I'm supposed to be able to recruit people, I should be able to sell a freaking house. So I did it and started doing that on the side. And that was a thing.
Which one's easier?
What's that?
Which one's easier?
Oh, recruiting people. Everybody self-recruits. The real ones all self-recruit. The training's the hard stuff. We all know if you get that guy or gal that's like serious about what they're about and you pick up on it real fast, not a problem. They sell themselves. We all know that.
So just to be clear, it's easier to get somebody to probably commit a capital offense in their country than it is to sell a house in the United States.
Yeah.
In the interest rates? I mean, come on.
Yeah. All my realtor friends out there, just hopefully you heard that and you can pass that along to your leadership.
No, 100%. But then, something I also ended up doing that was really fun that tested me, and I participated in. I started doing a lot of theater with local universities. They're always looking for people to play dads and stuff, and like we just fell in that age group, for them and the stuff that they're doing. But memorizing lines, playing a role, being a person for something. It's no different than, the other types of training. It's just a variation of it. So there's all kinds of creative ways that people can try and like break down their capabilities to interact with different people in different ways and become more strategic, whether it's for intelligence collection purposes or to be more genuine and authentic at interviews for high profile companies that expect a lot out of you.
I'll say two things about that. One, D&D, right? I'll throw my nerd cred out there. Tabletop role playing is a great way to practice those skills, right? The other thing, and Dan, I don't want to put you on the spot too hard, right? I think you probably dealt with this worse than any of the four of us. When I joined the Marine Corps, like I had no NCOs that were combat vets. I had nobody who had done like real tactical collection. So I was a SIGINTer for my first 12 years. And so we were waiting for the Afghan vets, the like first batch of Afghan vets to come back and rotate through to even have any idea of like what real tactical, not running around Camp Pendleton and Camp Lejeune, what it actually looked like to do tactical collection. Because nobody had seen it. And so it was those early NCOs coming back. To your point, Ryan, I'm not sure how concerned I am about it. I want people to practice talking. I want people to practice reading and reporting. I want people to be good at the skill set. But we've been here at least once in my lifetime where like the skill set was trash, and you had to build something from scratch. And so I think as long as we're having the conversation, I think as long as we're trying to do something, maintain a little bit of the institutional memory of 20-ish years of constant rotations, I think we're in better shape than we think we are. Right? We shouldn't sit on our laurels, but I think those skill sets bounce back pretty quickly institutionally.
I think they're all great points, gentlemen. I'd like to just throw one other thing out there, but I do want to move on to the next question. Ryan's getting anxious. But I think we're in the same period we were kind of between the post-Cold War or the post-Cold War pre-9/11. And it's going to go back to the Cortinia days of Fort Huachuco, where it's a made-up country and it ties to training. To get better at your skills, you need to go out there and practice them through training. And I truly do believe CI and HUMINT modernize through training. Unlike SIGINT, unlike EMINT, you can buy a piece of software, you can attach it to the widget. Just to be a better professionalized force, you need to practice those skills, and it's going to, I think, be in person and in training. Anyways, I digress, gentlemen. So I want to transition over here. So Nita Callis, shout out if our audience has not listened to her episode. It's episode 88, human trafficking, but she poses the next question. The order for this question: Dan, Mike, Nick, and Damon. So the question is, again, thank you, Nina. How do you actually train elicitation techniques to young collectors? And Dan, I'll give you a minute to think about it, because I got a little story about this. Here I am, a young agent case officer out there doing great work, and we're doing elicitation training. And the exercise was go to a local box store and elicit a piece of information. And this piece of information I had to pull from a random, I don't know, it was probably out of a hat. Go find out their favorite toy growing up. I failed miserably, because how the hell do you do that? So, gentlemen, I'm looking forward to learning from you. How do you actually train elicitation techniques to young collectors? Dan, over to you.
I mean, I'll tell you what I do with young people right now that are trying to break into the security industry. I have them focus on 3 specific companies that they want to target. No more than that. 3 for everything. They're all in on, and we're going to work at one of those. We have them tailor the resume for each one of those companies based off of their organizational values, the information about those companies. I have them do an assessment on the amount of people that are publicly facing on LinkedIn. What do they value? What do they post? What type of certificates do they have? What type do they not? Are they a no certificate company where they look at certificates as like something adverse, because biases are there in all directions in these things? I basically apply human targeting to them online through LinkedIn to tell them how to start off an engagement and approach them, and have some sort of reason why they would be someone that they would be interested in having a conversation with. Maybe they identify a problem the company has and solves it for them, and is able to give it to them for free in exchange for 15 minutes for the possibility to work for you. Those types of things. That's what I've been doing, because I think right now in the digital space, it's a lot easier and it's cleaner. And for whatever reason, like everything is cringe. The basic bumps that we used to do back in the 90s and 2000s. I don't know if that's just going to get you called. That they're just going to call the cops. I don't know if it's like that anymore, man. That's just I don't think, not socially acceptable in the way that we used to try and do those things. But I'm sure it still works in some cases, right? There's always the beautiful man in the bar and the beautiful woman.
Yeah, so tailing off of that, I mean, that's how I learned, was the beautiful woman at the bar, right? Try to get her number, try to get the social security number or some important snippet of her life. Usually just led to long conversations about daddy issues, and so but other than that, teaching the hourglass structure, teaching being authentic, really. A lot of times since post Marine Corps experience, when I've tried to teach people this concept, it's all been, how do you lead somebody down a pathway to something that they normally wouldn't talk about, right? And the big part of that is just being authentic, knowing what you're in there to get, first of all. So going to Dan's point, doing that pre-work online. The way I see it, your target is a bubble. You're playing a lot at the edges of the bubble to figure out what might be inside the bubble, what might be inside the safe, so that you have a full plan as you're going into it, in order to get the information that you need. A lot of plan, a lot of prep. And I teach a lot of folks elicitation, obviously for the purpose of defense against it, right? I feel like the best way to teach it is to see it in action, to learn the principles from the offensive side, so that your defensive side is obviously much stronger for recognition purposes. But in today's world, it's a lot of OSINT, right? It's a lot of commercial and PAI research before you even get in front of the target, so you don't get the cops called on you fortunately. But yeah, so it's a lot of pre-work. It's teaching people to understand both sides of it so they can know when it's happening to them, also know what it looks like from the offensive side, and putting in the work and knowing what you want before you get there so that you can fully control the conversation.
I think, at least where I'm at right now, right, and I'm not dealing with people who have been pre-screened to be personable necessarily, right? And my wife's a teacher, and we talk a lot about her work in the house as well. So I'll use one of her pedagogical terms, and we scaffold, right? So you scaffold the learning here. You send out, and I completely agree, Mike, right? Understanding what the threat environment is for elicitation is the first and best lesson. So we have a coffee shop. I'm not going to name it because it is just sweet, and it is at like the center point of like 4 different little defense contractors. It also happens to be one of my favorite coffee shops, and so when I get my truck worked on, I'll just hang out in there, and every single time I hear something that I'm certain is classified, and it's spectacular. And so I've heard about supply chain issues. I've heard about failures of equipment. I've heard about just all sorts of incredible stuff. So I go to my team of baby engineers and I say, okay, here's what I want you to do. First thing, sometime over the next month, I want you to go someplace by yourself, and I want you to just hang out. And I don't want you to get arrested, and I don't want you to be weird. I just want you to go grab a beer by yourself, or grab a coffee by yourself, and just listen. And listen to what other people are talking about. And listen to the incredible, I have young engineers coming back and telling me, oh my God, there is this restaurant in North Boulder where all they do, it's just every person who's having an affair rotates through this restaurant. And so every single person who's sitting next to me, I'm just listening to these torrid love affairs that they're having. Incredible. Can't wait. Right? So we do that for a little while. Just get them used to listening and how easy it is for your own shit to get transmitted out to somebody else. Okay? Cool. Now, go bump somebody, right? In the middle of their conversation. I'm so sorry, I couldn't help it over here, but I love blah, 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 and just try and steer the conversation, right? It doesn't have to be a severe steer. You don't have to be actively trying to elicit a specific thing. Just inject yourself into a random person's conversation and see if you can't tinker with it a little bit. Come back. Okay, cool. Now, what's something that you don't think they would want to tell you about? Right? I love the example of, you're get the girl's phone number, interrupt somebody on their run, right? This tough stuff. But like, if you're not screened for that, and you don't, that's throwing somebody into the deep end. Just get these people talking with people, and eventually we've all heard this before, but you naturally elicit. Right? This is just conversation. And so for some reason, when we start to elicit things intentionally, we don't know what to do with our hands anymore. And so just get people used to being weird but not off-putting in public, and have them kind of guide their own conversations that way.
Yeah, so I think like some of the others touched on, that the science piece is important, right? And you can teach the techniques and like hourglass, and you can do doing it and also receiving it, right, to get kind of both ends. But the art piece, I think, comes down to, being passionate, having the right personality, being adaptable, being able to realize non-verbal, right, and social cues to figure out, hey, what somebody's communication style is, what's their personality like, especially if you go in cold, right? And every situation is different. How much research you have and things like that. All of that kind of matters, but being able to adapt and respond to that, and then motivations, right? Just like any other, collection type activity, you need to know what that person's motivation is that's going to make them want to provide whatever it is you want, right? So you can understand the science portion, you can follow all the right techniques and the hourglass, but you need to have the art portion that can put those things together. Otherwise, I'm sure everybody's seen it in training, right? You could hit all the wickets, right? Hit all the techniques, hit the grading syllabus, just right. And it looked like a complete, train wreck happening, right, in a social setting because they didn't have any of those other things. They weren't passionate about what they were talking about. They didn't captivate the person they were trying to elicit, information from. They didn't know what their motivations were. They didn't adapt when they're, got punched in the face right off the bat because they assumed, their communication style and, personality was one way, but it turned out to be different. And then they just, fell apart. Right. I think, that's probably, you can teach all the technical stuff to get back to, I think, to the question just fine. Right. And probably just about everybody that's in the wider range of, assessment selection, kind of range, right, for what we do, you can do that easily. But to finite or tone that down to, a really honed skill, you need to focus on, hey, being passionate about it, having the right personality and adapting. But then also each person's different, meaning how Jeremy might approach it, or Ryan or me or anybody else, on here. Everybody's different and is going to have different shortfalls and problems that they're going to need to work on. So being able to realize what those shortfalls are from a training perspective, those intangible things, that I mentioned, and following up on that and forcing them into scenarios that hones those things for them is really the key, I think, to teaching that at a quality level, over time.
Well,
real quick,
yeah, go ahead.
On that. Yeah, on that, I think it's also important to recognize, like, what's the extent to which you're expecting them to do the work, right? So, like, if my training platform, my training regimen is going to be very different if I'm training someone for tactical HUMINT, or if I'm training somebody, if I'm working with an engineer to go to a conference, right? I think I brought this up during my interview, but my youngest is on the spectrum. And so we have a phrase in the house that we use on a regular basis, which is risen with autism. And if I want to send him into a situation where he gets to talk about mixing beats, or he gets to talk about J's or something like that, 100%, I'm sending my 12-year-old kid into that situation, because he will elicit every single piece of information with no sense of, like, social weirdness. But then if I need him to go in there and start collecting information about child trafficking, he's not my guy, right? Like, and so I think it's really important to recognize what you're training your person for and how you're doing that, and, like, setting a realistic expectation for what our training program looks like.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. Great point, guys. I do have a kind of a thing, though, because I'm a little surprised y'all didn't talk about the culture of the target, or the culture of Americans whenever it comes to elicitation techniques. And I will tell you, it's been my experience. If I'm with a senior leader in the military, or a senior leader in a business environment, and many times as parents, grandparents, they love to correct you. And it's an American trait. And so if I say, like, Jeremy, your favorite toy as a kid was a bicycle, right? And he has to automatically correct me. And it's an elicitation technique that I think is very effective on Americans and senior leaders, because they can't leave the incorrect thing out in the air. They must engage and say, oh, no, my favorite toy was football. Well, so I think understanding the culture that you're entering into and using these techniques on is extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think what that really boils down to is maybe American superiority complex, or just basically ego, right? And for those that have worked with the science community from a CI perspective, I think there's a lot of that there as well. So one of the toughest things that I've found is separating ego from the possibility of elicitation for scientists and academics. I think it's one of the hardest things. I think a lot of the cases that we end up seeing drawn out and play out are from that lack of recognition response that is somehow attached to ego. I don't claim to have a great solution for it, other than, again, showing them what that looks like. And I've even sat down with some scientists and given my period of instruction, and afterwards they're like, "Oh, we need to go to the skiff and talk," because looking back on some conversations I've had recently, now that I've seen this, I think we need to have another discussion. That's an area where I see that being a huge problem. But to your point, culturally, yeah. I've also found it useful if I'm in part of a delegation of individuals that are more senior than I am. I'm typically playing some kind of subordinate role in that scenario. Being the guy who's technically proficient, or at least can speak the language well enough while the executives or whoever is having their high level strategic discussions, and being able to use that as like, hey, how can we on our level, I typically try to find a peer, right? Someone that's a technical expert from the other side, and say, how can we work together to create solutions while they're off, planning the next thing. And that level of engagement and elicitation is usually useful.
I think isolation there is a part of it also, right? I have not been away from home where a cigarette and talking shit about the boss doesn't unlock everything, right? Oh yeah, hey, can I bum one of those off you? Man, that guy was treating you like a real dick earlier. Oh, let's just turn on the waterworks. Here we go. Let's get it going. As soon as you have these people, and like, this is why, like a conference setting, right? You slowly steer them away into one of those meeting rooms, and then it's all over, right? As soon as you isolate and give somebody an excuse to either show off their ego, or show off their research, or talk about how big and strong they are, right? They'll just start going. I will say, Ryan, like, one of the reasons I'm sketchy about teaching specific techniques, because, for example, when I was in Jordan, right, I could say everything wrong in the whole world, and they would just look at me and nod, because they were just strictly out of politeness. And they knew I was wrong, I knew I was wrong, and they would never correct me. And so when you start, like, I think there's some healthy stuff to learn, right? There's some give to get, there's some playing a useful idiot kind of stuff. And sometimes it just doesn't work. And so for me, it's more, there's a real cultural immersion piece of this that really matters when it comes to, like, from a counterintelligence perspective, knowing how Americans like to brag is really helpful. When it comes to a human perspective, that can be extraordinarily tough.
So I'll tell you, it'd be interesting, and I'd love to see comments, after the episode from folks, but something that's not in MICE, right? That was taught across, CI and HUMINT from a collection, source perspective, and something that trumps everything, right? Like, doesn't matter if you're on the left, on the right, doesn't matter what religion you are, or where you're at in the world, nothing brings two people together like mutual hate of something. And I will tell you right now, like, mutual hate will cross languages, cultures, societies, doesn't matter. If you can find a topic for mutual hate, you're in, and they'll probably tell you anything, and they'll get past the fact that, your societies might have had, religious, problems for 1,000 years. But if you hate the same individual group or thing, I mean, you guys might as well be, brothers. So I'd love to see some topics on that, because from an elicitation standpoint, if you know something, kind of like Nick talked about, like, they hate the boss or whatever, nothing gets somebody going like mutual hate, right, of a topic, and just lets them unload, all of that stuff inside. And it's real easy. Once that starts, I mean, it's easy in there to take turns and to ask different questions and get into things you want to talk about, especially if it's work related.
And that's how the comments section of the internet was born.
Yep. I've heard that described as the grand unified theory of fuck that guy.
All right, guys, great job talking about elicitation, but we got to move on. We got to keep going. So please feel free to correct me whenever I'm wrong. Just saying. So the next question that we have right now, and we've danced around it. I mean, we've kind of set the foundation for it. There are traits that make a really good counterintelligence HUMINT professional, but so we may not need to spend too much time on it, but if you would, in your own words, just let us know what those traits are that you're looking for. And we'll start with Nick, then we'll go to Dan, then we'll go to Damon, and we'll finalize it with Mike.
I think, actually referring back to the elicitation conversation, I think interested is really one of the best traits that you can recruit for. Somebody who is legitimately, and I am saying this from a self-interested perspective, because I'm pretty much, every person I've ever met has been the coolest and most interesting person I've ever met. I just want to know everything about them. And that kind of trait where you're just genuinely curious and just want to hear everything about somebody, I think we'll talk about a little bit about authenticity later, but I think that really comes across as either authentically interested or authentically disinterested if somebody doesn't have that. And so I think that's one of those gatekeeping skills, traits, I don't know how you describe it, where somebody has to just really want to hear your story. And if they can do that with anybody, then that's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, natural curiosity, absolutely. And then for me, the other thing is somebody who runs towards problems. Doesn't matter how stupid it is, how simple it is, or complex. If you're that person that's always stepping in saying, I'll take care of that, I own that, those types of things, like that's always resonated well with me. And I've seen people, gain a lot of success in offerings for training and deployment just from having that attitude.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to go with adaptability, I think, right? Like, and if Lisa was inside, she's out by the pool right now, but if she was inside, she'd hear me say when we were both still on active duty, she saw work Damon, right? One day, right? When she had came by the office because she was over at SOCOM and we were over in the CENTCOM, annex building, and she came by to see me, right? She had badge access. So she came by at lunchtime and she got to hear me like talking, to some of the rest of the staff that worked for me and some of the other collection elements. And she was like, oh man, like you're kind of a dick, right? Or like, whatever, right? And different, right? Because she had never seen me like at work, like in uniform. And I told my chief at the time, like, hey, it's a good learning piece of you got to be who you need to be when you need to be it, right? So if you're in a source meet, right, in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, and you got the local police chiefs like, hand on your leg during the meet because that's what makes him comfortable, right? Knowing, what that guy probably does later with, Chai boys, right? Regardless of your religion, regardless of what you think, whatever, but like you got to be who you need to be in that moment, right? To like do the job. To you're a staff officer later on, to you name it. I think that adaptability piece from a personality and authenticity is crucial, right? Like there's some things you can fake till you make it, and there's some things you just can't, right? So if you don't have that ability to turn that off and on and turn on a dime to different things, you could be at that tactical level doing that thing 1 minute, and then a day later you could be briefing some general officer, right, and have to use the Queen's English, right? If you can't do that, you're going to struggle, I think, at doing most CI and HUMINT work at some of the most critical times.
Yeah, I would echo what David said. I think what everyone was alluding to, jack of all trades, master of none. the most important being the master of none, right? Having the humility to be a lifelong learner. So, just strengthen your weaknesses where they exist, but just have that mindset, right, of adaptability, and have that mindset of like, what can I take on next? Not only out of this altruistic interest and desire to have additional skill sets, but so that you can be passionate about it when you have to talk about it with others, right? I forget who made the point, but being passionate during elicitation is huge, right? Very quickly, anybody who's educated or has significant experience in any space. I mean, I saw this on convention floors in the defense industrial base. You get to talking to some people who are just jaded, right? And I don't want to spend any more time with you, right? You've done all that there needs to be done, and I can read it on your face. You don't want to be here anymore. You win a lot of space when you're able to just be really passionate about the things, whether you know the Wikipedia page version of it or you've been doing it for 15 years. Always wanting to learn, I think, comes along with it a sense of humility that's needed for the job.
Damon, you said something really interesting to me that kicked something loose in my brain, going back to the original question about training young collectors. I think that adaptability piece is something that we don't harp on enough. It's one of those things where it's like, when you have hair like this, you never want to get it cut, right? And I recognize that. And sometimes, like, having just the most screamingest high and tight is what you have to do to be able to get access to what you need to have access to. And sometimes you have to look like a real piece of shit, which is easy, right? And everything in between. A lot of guys in our community, especially young collectors, are really, really seized up with the whole cowboy aspect of being a CI human marine, and they don't yet recognize. And this is one of those things that we should be teaching, not just collectors in the service, but collectors whole cloth. Is that, like, you have to be who you have to be to get the piece of information that you need, right? And so if that means like having a horseshoe and only working out in green on green, no, even the horseshoe, right? It doesn't even matter, right? I can't remember who it was, but there was somebody who recently tweeted out that I would kill every gorilla to save one human being. And the response to that was, yeah, but would you suck every gorilla's dick to save one human being, right? And part of this is like, you got to do what you got to do for the job, right? And so you don't get to pick and choose what aspect you get to, like, I'm only ever going to be the cool guy, have the beard, have the long hair, and have the wizard sleeves, right? No, sometimes you just have to be the most first sergeant that is ever first sergeant across the Marine Corps in order to get the job done. And again, I think that's adaptability, and I think that a lot of that comes back to maturity.
Nick, God, so I've had very limited experiences with Marines through the course of my career. But back in 1996, we were doing an exercise at White Sands Missile Range. And
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's horrible. but we had a Marine radar unit that we were supporting, and so they're riding in trucks with us, and we were going back and forth, and we were, I think between Roswell and White Sands or something. And I had this Marine with me, and we pulled into the gas station. I mean, we're in the middle of absolute nowhere. And we walk into the store. I grab a Coke, some cigarettes. I think I was probably smoking back in those days or whatever. And I walk out of the store and I'm going to the truck. It's like, all right, bro, let's go jump in the truck. And he's like, I'm not leaving this covered area. I was like, well, what are you talking about? He was like, I have a drink in my hand and a cigarette. I will not leave this covered area unless, until I'm done. And I was like, bro, there's nobody out here. He was like, I don't care. If one Marine happened to drive by and see me walking across this parking lot with a cigarette and a Coke in my hand in uniform, he would jump out and kick the shit out of me. And so, I mean, I just wonder when we talk about picking CI HUMINT people, because y'all do operate in the gray areas sometimes,
Sure.
I mean, Do you find it hard for Marines to set that aside to do that, to play that role or do that job? Or is it so deeply ingrained in their psyche, like, no, man, I'm not doing that. Some dude will come and kick the shit out of me.
Listen,
Go ahead, Damon. Yeah,
I'm going to scoot in closer so you can see my hair a little bit better. You know how many gray hairs I got from having conversations about like long hair, beards, civilian clothes, and like people using first names? Like I will tell you, I think it's on. I'd have to read it. I think it's on my retirement plaque hanging on the wall back there because it happens so often. Like
I have a few of those hairs named after me, don't I?
Maybe. Right? Like, there's so many at this point I can't even remember, and it's probably more so. So on our end, it's the, like Nick said, they get to do it once, and then they just can't turn it off. They don't know when they go back to reality and when they should switch. Right. The other part is like I'd get a call, and somebody would find out. I don't know. Like after a couple months, and be like, I found out so and so's a Marine. Right. The whole time he was calling me, by my first name, and I was calling him by his first name and whatever. And it's like, well, I mean, like that's because that person wasn't using, right, like their real name and some other stuff. And like the Marine Corps just couldn't comprehend that. Right. One of the biggest arguments I ever had was and again, we'll leave the names out, right, to protect the not so adaptable. I won't say innocent, but the not so adaptable. The component sergeant major, right, at Marcent before I retired, we had to go to him, and no matter what, right, like twice a year, dudes had to take a physical fitness test and do height and weight. But per the physical fitness order, they had to be in a Marine Corps uniform. But if they're in a Marine Corps uniform, they had to be within grooming standards, right? So I go to the sergeant major and I'm like, listen, so at the end of this conversation, I'm just going to lay it out front so you know what we're going to get to, that we're going to agree on which Marine Corps order we're going to violate right by the end of this conversation. And of course, he's like, blah, like there's no way, like we can't do that. We can't violate one. And I'm like, listen, I got to tell you, like they're really just guidelines. Like there's no Marine Corps order police. Like nobody's going to show up and take us off to Leavenworth, like for not having a haircut. Like you just need to relax for a second and let's walk through this logically. So these folks can't be affiliated with the organization. These folks have long hair and beards, which don't grow overnight. And 2 days out of the year, they need to take a height, weight, and physical fitness test so they can continue to get promoted, so the Marine Corps' big green weenie doesn't fuck them over after they're getting done doing some stuff for national security, right? So would you like to violate, right, the grooming order or the uniform order or the physical fitness, order? I was like, because in my mind, I think they need to take the test so they can get promoted. So it's not the physical fitness order, the height, weight, and all that stuff. And I think probably we could be okay if they have long hairs and beards and wear green on green. Like Chesty Puller is not going to rise from the grave if we do that. So let's go with the grooming order, and they'll just be out of grooming regs when they take it. But we'll do it in a place where nobody else can see it, right? And we got to the end of that, and I will tell you, like, I thought, like, he was going to build a fighting position right in his office, and like we were going to start, slinging lead at each other. So at the end of the day, the commander, cooler heads prevailed. And he was like, so yeah, you'll just violate the grooming order and just not tell the sergeant major when you guys do your 2 days a year, right? Like, let's just not do that again. And I was like, well, sir, I didn't think I needed to tug on Superman's cape, right? Like, I don't need to go ask the 3-star about doing that, right? But apparently I did, because he just couldn't let it go, right? So I think most of it, probably more so the institution, right? The Marine Corps is just not used to doing that. And there's a reason for that, right? But then there's a good percentage of our community that just can't turn it off, right? That like, once they get to be a cool guy once, they want to be that guy forever, and they don't understand it's not the hair or the clothes or anything else that makes you the cool guy, right? So it's your ability to get stuff done. So if you have to wear a horseshoe, like Nick said, or do other stuff, then by God, you got to do it.
Well, and I think the other side of that is we want to recruit folks who look at the world a little bit different than the average person who is joining the Marine. It is a skill set, and it's a there's a set of criteria about what we need in a CI Gamut Marine. And I don't know that I know any CI Gamut Marines that don't have a little bit of an anti-authoritarian streak in them. Now that's to different levels, but that's part of what we're looking for is someone who can work out independently. If you work independently, you don't necessarily always want to follow all the rules all the time. And so, like Damon said, you hope that you can instill some sort of quality of knowing when to turn it off and turn it back on. But part of what we're recruiting for is the ability to talk yourself out of trouble and run logic circles around somebody who's trying to convince you that you have to be, clean shaven with a haircut and running grain on grain when you do your PFT, right? That's kind of part of the game, and it's hard to pull yourself out of that. It can be hard to pull yourself out of that mindset once you put yourself into it. But again, I think that's also partly maturity.
That gray space, I think we all live and love to live right there, right? But before I ask the next question, I do have to comment. Ryan, I did not have gorillas on my bingo card. So, Nick, well played, good sir.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. I love it.
Hey, so for our next question, shout out to D. Peters from LinkedIn for sending this one over. And when he sent it over, I was thinking of two different lyrics. The first one being by the police, we're prisoners of our own device. Not just trapped in your head, but I think the cell phones that we carry in our hand. And the other one was from Jonah Lucas. It's look up, cell phone zombies. How have we become this as a society? So the question, again, thanks for sending it over, Mr. Peters. Has human nature changed in the area of let me start over. Has human nature changed in the era of social media? And how can we train collectors differently because of it? So for the order, how about Mike, Damon, Dan, and Nick? I'll repeat the question one more time because I botched it. Has human nature changed in the era of social media? And how should we train collectors differently because of it? Mike, over to you.
So the first part of that question, I think, is pretty easy, and I think the answer is yes. Human nature has definitely changed in the era of social media. Never before I graduated high school would I ever think that people would have a special class of friends called social media friends or Facebook friends that they did not know in their personal lives. We had analogs to that, pen pals, whatever, but we've made this streamlined in society that you can know people only online and confide your deepest, darkest secrets to them. What's even scarier is now that people are doing that with AI and large learning models, that people are having substantial relationships with these logic models, which is wild to me. But yeah, so the landscape has changed. And the second part, do we or how do we change collections accordingly? I think in a lot of places we're doing this well. Again, we need to make people aware that the threat exists out there. For a lot of people that I talk to, a lot of people I've dealt with, even inside the military, even inside this field, we have some rose-colored glasses about the threat that exists online and on social media. People assume that they can log in and assume a different identity and somehow think that that's completely disassociated from what they do in their daily life. Which is sadly not the case, and as nebulous surveillance, as ubiquitous technical surveillance continues to grow, like that margin just gets smaller and smaller, and that divide gets smaller and smaller. What do we do in terms of collection? One, we get better at going on the offensive. We learn to exploit those things better than our adversary can. The Emma Gray program, the the other dissident collection programs that existed out in that space for a long time in the CI HUMINT space. We could probably do it better as whole of government of taking advantage of that. From a corporate perspective, are keeping close eye on how our employees engage with academic peers is going to be huge. Putting them then to that mindset of, everyone you talk to could be a censor. A lot of times I'll use the quip, what is counterintelligence in the modern world? It's us pretending to play checkers while actually playing chess, while we're missing a few pieces, while the adversary is playing Go. And what the big takeaway from that is, a lot of our adversaries are playing in a volumetric perspective, right? Like they're throwing minimally trained elicitors at everything that we have in the hopes of gaining little nuggets that they can piece behind the firewall. And so I think the U.S. and our allies, our traditional model has, protect the gems, right? Put the gems in the safe and protect the gems. But every little piece of information that exists out there in the wrong hands is a risk. And I think just changing that mindset and showing the ways that the adversary can get there in terms of using your online profiles, using the way that you engage in social media and your forums and Discord. And it's all little pathways that lead to their little gem, which happens to be our grain of sand. And that's the biggest way I think we could change things. Education.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, right? But for, a craft, right, that's been around for a very long time, I think human nature's, changed a ton of times over the years. And there's been a ton of societal influences on that, whether it's technology, whether it's you name it. I mean, they probably said the same thing about automobiles or electricity or, the internet in general, like you name it, right? What I think is changing that we should pay attention to is the pace in which those things influence, right, humans in society, and how much we should focus and adapt to that on training, right? So I don't remember the time frames, but if you look at certification by the National HUMINT Manager and you look at J Metals, right, down to the schoolhouses, I think they do annual reviews and other stuff and their recertifications and things like that. But there's not much in the art portion of that, right? There's not a lot of wiggle room for societal influences or, hey, because of social media and technology, interpersonal skills, right, and the ability to read people and personality deficits and other stuff have grown over the last 20 years. Like that's not in there, right? So how do you realize that? How do you document that? And how do you adapt to that from a training perspective? I think that's the biggest piece, right? And being able to flex to that, just like from a counterintelligence perspective, as threats go up, right? You need to be able to meet those threats the same speed. The biggest, terms these days from like the Global Competition Export and other stuff is like competition and pacing threats and other stuff. Well, if you want to keep pace with threats to your ability to adapt to human nature, you got to be able to realize them, document them, train to those deficiencies, right? And keep moving and keep that cycle going. They're definitely different than they used to be, right? Like, I mean, we could all go back right to when we went to the schoolhouse and see changes to then. I mean, they didn't even have iPhones then, right? So like the huge differences in just that short amount of time, that's not even a generation, right? So that's significant. And now folks that are just born into that, they'll be significantly different by the time they're 18. They've spent their whole life in that environment, and they get to the military, and you have to train them from that, right? And imagine you being a senior staff NCO or officer who came in when you didn't have those things, and now you got folks coming in that have only been in that environment. The differences there from a human nature perspective, and the ability to, train collectors and read people and do this kind of stuff is significant. You have to be able to close that gap.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that's changed technologically that influences all of this is an expectation of availability online. When you find somebody that has nothing, they're either an old guy like me that doesn't want to have any of that stuff, but for the younger generation, it's almost creepy depending, right? Like there's usually a data trail of some sort across for them. And how does that affect you long term? With AI, I personally believe we're going to go through a major shift in what an expectation of privacy is, because when these things are all tied together at an instantaneous rate, it's going to be a lot harder to mitigate data brokers and things like that recycling information about people. So what I think right now, everybody still doesn't know what it's going to look like. But what I believe it is going to come into is a place of transparency to a certain extent. And the younger generation coming into CI and HUMINT are going to have to be able to be almost public about them being such a thing. AI has already tied all of our promotion messages from all throughout the 90s and 2000s, all saying that we worked at, whatever 3-code location that can be found, what our MOS was, all of it. And that's forever.
Yeah, the possibility of AI and the disparate pieces of information that are going to get connected via that process, I think is, from an analytics perspective, absolutely terrifying for the future of certainly for the future of HUMINT. And I think it could be real wishy-washy, go one way or the other, or probably both when it comes to CI. I think, just getting back to the original question, has human nature changed? No, I just think it's a different environment in which you're playing the game. I think ultimately people are still looking for shelter, they're still looking for food, they're still looking for community. And now they're doing that on Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, insert thing here. And some people are going one step further. I can't remember who brought it up earlier, but people dating chatbots, right? It's people looking for community. And so from a human perspective, like, how do we train human collectors to deal with this? Well, holy shit, like, hide your own stuff and read as much as you can about the people you're going to start targeting, right? Because they're just putting it out there willy-nilly. What you used to talk about around a fire, smoking cigars, some of us probably still do that, but now you're doing it just on a regular basis. In terms of counterintelligence practitioners, how we should start training them is, I think Mike hit the nail right on the head. It's an educational question, right? This is, people don't know what they don't know. And until you make it clear what the stakes are and what it is that they're doing and how they're doing it, they're not going to change their behavior. To Dan's point, I don't know if it matters for too much longer. But at least in the meantime, right, I have some social medias. I basically check to make sure that nobody is hacked into them at this point, and that's because I don't want to go through the rigmarole of trying to delete them. But like, eventually, even what I put on my social media doesn't matter, because they're going to collate, the location of my phone compared to the location of my wife and my kids' phones, and how long we spend with them, and then they're going to associate that within my work community and with my friend communities and see what they're interested in, right? And they're going to have 1,000 different algorithms to pinpoint me as a person. There's basically no way around that, right? That is the future of marketing and intelligence. So all we can do is, like, what's the next step? Okay, well, these people are going to come talk to you, and they're going to know literally everything about you, and they're going to hit you up for secrets. Don't give them secrets, right? Let's talk through what that process looks like. Let's talk through what it means to protect our business, our country, things like that. I don't know that we have a real option outside of real in-depth education to combat something like the direction we're going, even where we are currently.
Well, I do have an observation. I was just wondering if y'all have seen the same thing, especially in the corporate environment. And you're working in-house and you have a meeting where everybody goes to a conference room, but everybody brings their laptops with them. They set their laptop onto the conference table. And I was recently watching a video. We're podcasters. I'm making shorts. I'm trying to figure this whole thing out. And in the TikTok area, or in the TikTok era, the shorts era, you have about 1.5 seconds to capture somebody's attention before they switch off, before they flip to the next video. And I've seen this play out in corporate America in the conference room. It will all sit down with a laptop, and then you have about, I would say, probably less than 3 to 5 seconds to capture everybody's attention before their heads down into their computer, checking email, sending messages, whatever, but not paying attention. And so I think there's going to be a real attention deficit problem, especially in our younger generation, because they're so conditioned to just swipe away or to escape whatever that is or move on to the next. So just wondering if y'all have seen that play out in corporate America like I have.
I have, but it's a little different now than it was even a year ago. With companies using, either ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini as an enterprise solution, anytime you're collaborating on something within a group, you've basically got a central location that you're working from with AI integrated. Everybody can simultaneously do the things together. So like nowadays, I would say it's merging more into a place of efficiency, whereas in the last 5 years, it was more of like a question of social tolerance for everyone being so rude, not paying attention to one another and just checking emails and all of it. But you couldn't say anything. 10 years ago, we would have said, close your computers. So it's changed over the years.
Absolutely. I also think there's an advantage to being handsome and funny and entertaining and knowledgeable, right? Come back to something that we have hit multiple times here, which is the ability to engage with people. If the information you're presenting is boring, either you have to present different information or you have to figure out a way to church it up so that people actually want to listen to you. If you're the responsible party for the meeting, right? If not, then it's the same as it was 10 years ago. It's the same as it was 20 years ago. It's the same as it was 30 years ago. Now, instead of just staring off blankly into space, now they have something else that they can use to engage themselves and make themselves look busy, right? This is core to, and I'd love to hear Mike's perspective on this, especially. This is core to my problem with how much of the government chooses to do industrial security. It seems like they go out of their way to make it the most boring thing that they possibly can. Just the driest, most boring, most cookie cutter. And they find the person with the beigest suit and the least facial expression. They come in and they just Ben Stein voice the entire time. And then they get to someone like me at my workplace, and my coworkers and my employees, they look at me like, well, no one in security has ever talked to us like you do. And how's that? Well, you have something interesting to say. Righteous, thug life, cool, let's do that. So I understand that we're in a compliance-centric environment, but try some showmanship, do some jazz hands. I mean, try something to get somebody's attention before you start speaking. It's atrocious.
Yeah, I think the attention span is definitely something that we have to account for going into the future. I have different experiences with DCSA. Actually, a lot of the times I've seen the covering agents come in is very different what I would naturally like to do, but they come in and they drop the problem and they make it immediately relevant to that company or to that effort, that project, that technology. And then they say, hey, if you got any thoughts on this, you know where to reach me, right? Like they're not there to teach me the ins and outs of what I should be looking for right there in that moment. I know I've got a limited amount of time with people that are waiting on their next meeting. Here's the problem. Here's why it's relevant to you. Here's my number. You have my card. Let's talk about it. I have seen that be very useful. Getting people engaged on the work that they're currently doing and showing, either a case that is a very tight analog to something that they're working on to make it relevant in their space. I've even heard of a story where a DCSA agent came in and talked about a case where the guy had peer reviewed one of his papers or some of the work that he was doing, and it like immediately became relevant to him. Elsewhere in the corporate world, especially in like technology-centric companies, software-centric companies, it's about creating information for CI and the process and the risk in a way that they're used to receiving it, right? So like you got to remember these, especially the young engineer types, are very much like the thing that they're doing on their computer when they're not listening to you in the boardroom is that they're checking their workflows and like Calibra or one of the other workflow management programs, like just injecting the problem into that workflow and demonstrating like, if you don't build this CI concern in now, everything you do behind this is potentially at risk, right? And so they think of it in terms of work efficiency. And so if you're demonstrating, a potential conversation or extra step, and one of the beauty, a shameless plug for you guys, one of the things you're doing with 351X is like, how do we build our measures into currently existing compliance steps in other people's offices, or how do I just make it part of their workday so that these reports are flowing in and being congealed, behind our firewall in the product? I think that's what you have to do with a lot of the young audiences is like demonstrate the risk up front in their terms, and demonstrate how if you don't take care of it now, it becomes more work for you in the future, and making sure that you're delivering information in a way that they're used to receiving it.
That's awesome, guys. All right, so we've got about 30 minutes left in this piece. So we may have to come back. We've still got about 27 questions left, but that's okay. We're just going to get through what we can get through, and we'll address the next ones at a later date. But this next question kind of dovetails off of the previous question. I mean, we're talking about this next generation that's coming up. And, we see the younger generation, they have this chat ability to text back and forth, the LOLs and, LMAOs, and they have a different way of communicating. And I've seen, just in the last 5 to 10 years, it's gone from these long form reports that we all wrote, that had every detail in a paragraph format, now down to more like brevity codes. They want brevity. They want just the meat and none of the fluff. And so how do we, this question came from Jonathan Ross. And he said, how do we train young collectors to write effectively? I think we've all seen the Hot R cookbook, or maybe I'm dating myself. Maybe it's something new now. An active voice, present tense. How do we get them to write effectively? How do we train that? For this question, I'll go to Nick, Dan, Damon, Mike.
There is no practice like practice, right? Writing. This is something that drives me crazy from both a verbal and a written correspondence perspective. There's a time to not be direct, and most of the time it is the time to be direct and active and in present tense. And unfortunately, I think there is a continuing education problem. I think when you have collectors who already, they themselves don't write in active voice and present tense, it's really hard to be a reports officer when you yourself are not practicing what you preach. Fuck, it's really hard if you don't know what active voice and present tense is. And so, A, they need to write a lot, and B, they need to be corrected a lot, and the person correcting them needs to know what active voice and present tense is. And I don't know that there's another way around it.
I mean, there's still value in teaching them it, but honestly, no one's going to like my answer. But we should be teaching them how to prompt and achieve that instead of writing like that, because they're only going to be writing like that for a matter of years, and then it's going to be transitioned out. There'll be, AI systems in SAPF facilities along with JWICs and the rest of it and all those things. Cable traffic will have an AI integration, and it'll actually be masterful, right? Like, think about to the days where you did one, had a few drinks with the person you're at, and you're trying to remember all this shit in the middle of the night to write this thing, and you sit down. Wouldn't it be way better if you could just blurp out anything you wanted, however you wanted, based off of what you remembered, and the thing just put it exactly how it's expected in the end? Still got to check it. Can't, just let it go automatic, but I would teach them to prompt instead of teaching them to write.
Yeah. So, I mean, I got to tell you, I've seen a change over the years, right? Writing cables and different types of cables, it depends. Writing intel reports, it depends, right, on where you're at and what you're doing. Some people want, right, like the Stephen King, I'm writing a novel, right, tell the whole story. Others are like, hey, cut out all that little stuff. I just want to see Spot run, right, and that's it. And only one is the shortest amount of facts as possible, and that's it. Or then you get to investigations or different types of reports, or you get into recruitment proposals and other things, and it's all different, right? I don't think that's necessarily going to change. I like Dan's point of AI. I think is going to help with that. AI tells me almost every day now, and Google Mail, right, writing an email. Sometimes when I mess up, that I should never write a novel, and that my grade school writing teachers, who some were nuns with rulers, should rise from the grave and beat me again, because I think I've reverted, right, in a lot of ways. Because if you're not thinking about the subject performing the action, subject verb, all that stuff all the time, and because of what you brought up, Ryan, about like texting's different and other stuff's very choppy and there's shorthand. It's almost now like those meeting notes that you used to take, right, where you had like your own shorthand, your choppy little symbols and words and other stuff to remember that whole conversation. But if anybody else saw it, they would think you got dropped on your head when you were a kid, right? That is combined with all those other factors leads to a very dysfunctional, writing style for most folks that spent the last 20, 25 years, right, in different environments doing different things. So can you teach that? No, right? Like, again, I think it comes down to adaptability. Folks who were taught a certain way at a young age and then could never change from that struggled and had problems like continuously because they just couldn't adapt, right? If you're able to adapt and like somebody's like, listen, subject verb, like, hey, no problem, got it. And like you can change, then you'll probably be fine. Just like when AI comes along and does it for you, you'll probably be fine. I think it was NVIDIA's CEO that said like AI is not going to take your job, but people who know how to use AI are the ones that are going to take your job, right? So you just have to be able to adapt, know what those things are, and change to it. Now that I'm out, right, and in the private sector, it's a little easier, right? I don't have to worry about the constant changes. But yeah, I think we overcomplicate it. I think some of those guides you mentioned, hot R guides and other stuff back in the day, tried to fix that. But when you have that many different humans involved, it's not something you can just choke into correction. You know what I mean? Like, it's just too many variables involved. It's always going to be different. at least for now.
Yeah, in terms of, how do we train the young generation to write better? One of the problems I suffered from, is I'm a stickler for detail, and I think all of us on this panel were taught at one point, like, put the most information you can in your reports, assuming that you get hit by a bus and you won't be there, and the other guy's got to pick up for you, right? So I think all of us in our careers start out trying to do the best we can, and then quickly realize there's a purpose to why we're writing certain reports and what the intended end state with those reports are. So just getting them information up front to say, hey, look, you're writing this report for a reason. And that reason could be that Dick gets hit by a bus, or Dan, falls out of an airplane. And I want to make sure that, somebody behind them can do the job appropriately. Having benefited from very detailed reporting and then going into a cold meeting, I appreciate that. But at the end of the day, we have to keep the purpose of it in mind. And I've seen some nasty cables, and I'm like, what is this even for? Why are you writing this? Keeping in mind the operation, what you intend it to be, and putting a good enough amount of detail to where you still have time to get a few hours of sleep before you go out and do it again, I think is important. It's all about balance. On the AI piece, I think the community, big C community here, we need to be mindful about, the peculiarities of information in terms of who gets to see what in regard to CI HUMINT information. My experience and my opinion right now is that the big C community has not cracked the nut on how do we use AI with SAPs, how do we use AI with certain control markings and control considerations. I'm personally working on a project right now with the Space Force where that is quickly coming to the forefront of, like, hey, we have this piece of information that we want to have different elements of at each classification domain. How do we teach the AI to handle these appropriately and then understand compilation rules, right? Like, you have the keys to everything. How do we tune those so based on the cat card I'm using to log in, how do we make that appropriate for what I get to see? So in that regard, my question is, why hasn't the community figured out a good dictation tool? Forget AI. Like, AI is on the horizon for sure, naturally, but like, we had never even figured out a good dictation tool, like, sit down when I come in and I take off my flak jacket, spend the first 10, 15 minutes recalling that meeting to a dictation tool to get my major thoughts down in a secure way that I can go back and massage a report out of that. So, like, let's solve that problem first, and then we can talk about AI running a commercial model. God knows who gets to see the back-end engineering information on that. But we also need to be thinking about that problem as well. So I would say, how do we teach the young generation? In my generation, we had college-educated folks, peacetime-born Marines that came in. They were writing for a college audience. We were often reminded we need to write for the high school audience when it comes to reporting. And so I think in the other part of that spectrum with this new generation of the LOLs and 6-7 and Skibbity Toilet, how do you stick to the Webster Dictionary, I think is what the point I'm trying to make is, like, don't get too far outside of the Webster Dictionary, and I think we'll be okay.
My whole team sends emojis and hearts all day long to one another. That's how we know people are liking the vibe. Did they like the product? It's how many hearts did I get? How many little flaming fingers up? All kinds of shit. That's how they do it.
We should do the same thing on Intel
evals, right? We did the same thing with evals,
exactly.
right?
That's exactly right. I mean, that should be our generation eval.
Yeah, if you can create a custom Slack emoji for evals to be able to respond to reporting, God, that's the best. I will say,
fire dynamite.
Yeah, I use 100% too much, and I know that. I recognize that. I will say, I think one of the things that's really important here, and all three of y'all touched on it, is like, what's the point of the reporting? So for me, I still like to read well-constructed paragraphs, right? I like to read a narrative. I like to read a story, and this is one of the first things that I think everybody in every field, but particularly in a field like this, should do, is the first time that you meet with somebody that you owe them a thing, you ask them how they like to consume information, right? Is it PowerPoints? Is it the written word? Is it bullet points? Is it emojis? Is it however it is? Because to Dan's point, like a lot of what we are going to be writing, I'm not writing this shit anymore, but a lot of what collectors are going to be writing is like food for the AI machine to consume and spit out a product on the other end. And so that has to be a completely different constructed report than the thing for where one person is reading the output of one process. And then it's a matter of who is your customer and how does your customer like to make decisions. And if you're creating something that isn't based upon making decisions or informing someone prior to making a decision, what's the point of what you're doing, right? And like all of us, probably at some point on one deployment or another, wrote some reports that you finished up, you closed the secret laptop, you went outside, you lit up a cigarette. It's like, was that worth my time, right? And like, I recognize that, right? So sometimes you got to bump up those numbers. But at a certain point, like if you're just writing information, I wrote a ton of reports that would have been great to feed into an AI, and you could watch trend lines raise and fall, right? And nobody ever should have read those reports because it was useless. It was useless as a snapshot. I think, Mike, to your point, I think universally tech stuff in the SAP world and in the SCI world, and just anywhere beyond an unclassified network, like they're not there yet. I don't think it's that long, right? And so eventually there will be LLM tools that are processing a tremendous amount of information on the SAP or SCI networks and spitting out something. The question is like, is active voice, present tense, is that the best way that the AI has to ingest that information? Or is it like 4 to 5 digit codes put into very specific fields that imply some piece of information, right? And I don't know, right? That's well outside of the bailiwick. I do think that like very specifically tailoring the report, right? The report that I need to pass off in case I get hit by a bus is very different than the, hey, is that hospital still good? Those are two very different reports. And so writing the report that you need to writing the report that you need to report to the right audience, I think is key.
Yeah, one thing I would add to that is, in the modern generation, we have all these stovepipes of information, right, that surround an operation, that surround a location, a target, a source, whatever, that we spend a lot of time creating narrative around. And this is nothing new. It's just I don't know how much it's been talked about in terms of the way we've traditionally done things in creating reporting and really getting into the bailiwick of what other silos exist. As a collector, is my time better spent creating a narrative about that discussion that I just had in minute detail, or is it finding a way to pull in another data stream that supplements what I'm trying to get across, whether that be a cyber profile, a biometrics profile, activity profiles that are coming from other collection means? I mean, we should say that's the job of the analyst, but who knows the source better than the collector and the handler? I think as we get into the AI and the mass data aggregation and kind of collection space, that also needs to be a verbiage of the collector is, how do I go out and find those other pieces of information to bring in to solidify the picture? And to your point, Nick, how do I put that in a way that's presented in a way best received by the intended audience?
Hey guys, so before I ask this question, because I want to stir the pot a little bit, actually I'm going to ask you if I can stir the pot, because I don't want to make 4 deadly lethal Marine Corps individuals out there hate on the Army much more than they already are. But before I do that, John Ross says hello. I just sent him a picture of y'all. He says you all look very old and very used. So he would expect nothing less from the Marine Corps. It seriously, he says hello. Gentlemen, so let me ask you before I ask this, right? I do have a stir the pot question, but if you aren't comfortable with that, I have a very easy question. Which would you all rather?
Stir the
Let's-
pot.
Yes.
Stir the pot.
All right, so I'm disagreeing with you guys on when it comes to leveraging AI and dictation devices to put into reports, and hear me out. First, I think AI is a little scary to me. I do think it kills critical thinking, and I go back to a young lieutenant putting an op word together who has to take a hill, and he wants to impress his boss. He puts into ChatGPT, Claude, pick a whatever service. Write me the best op order so I get a fantastic eval. There's no thought, rhyme, or reason behind it, and it looks great. The boss loves it. And when they go to execute this particular operation order, the adversary already has the information because they've corrupted these devices. I do think they're corrupted. So let's fast forward. I think like there's a place for AI, and I think it's reducing the cognitive burden of analysts. They have all this data that they need to look through. But me as a case officer, CI, or our human brethren out there, I find myself when I write a narrative thinking about what took place in the particular meeting. I look back and saying, oh, I should have asked this follow-up question. If I have a device, I'm just dumping information out to make a report look pretty. Am I losing, and here's my question, am I losing my ability to critical think? I'm gonna pass it back to you guys and stir the pot a little bit.
All right.
Oh.
Go ahead, Nick.
I've got negative 2 minutes before I have to go, so I'm going to bounce early from y'all, but I'm going to lob a grenade and then I'm going to bounce. I don't think it matters what we think, right? I think AI is going to end up on these systems anyway, and analysts are going to end up using AI systems anyway. And no matter what we do, for the most part, this is the trend line of the intel community as a whole and the defense community as a whole. And so whether or not it's the right thing, I tend to agree with you, Jerry. I'm a let's go buy chickens as opposed to investing in AI kind of guy, because I'm very suspect of most technology. It also doesn't matter because they're going to be using it anyway. And so let's use it in the way that is best and most effective and protects the most people and does the job the best, yada, 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 yada. But yes, I think it does affect critical thinking. And also, nobody seems to give a fuck but us.
So I'll disagree. I'll provide a dissenting opinion. I'll use the same analogy that Jeremy used, and just like when you go to the basic school, right, to be a Marine Corps officer, you can't use GPS at land nav, right? Like you still have to use a map and compass and still have to be able to do the basics to be able to get it done. Because at the end of the day, what GPS is a tool, but it's not necessarily the tool. Because at the end of the day, if all else fails, you can still use a map and compass. If you're in a denied environment from a GPS perspective, you can still use a map and compass, right? So same thing from a AI perspective. You still got to be able to do the basics, I think, but AI will enable you that. And we see that very much so at QIntel, right? Most of our partners are in the federal space, right? Federal law enforcement, TOW, or IC. And I think General Fenton said it pretty good at Soft Week last year, where he was like, hey, I don't think any time in our lifetime for certain things you're ever going to see AI solely doing something where a human, isn't in the loop. And for law enforcement, IC, and DoD partners that we support, we use AI to do what you just talked about, Jeremy, sorting through vast amounts of data to save time. Meaning I start with an email address or a name or a phone number, and I need to sort through petabytes worth of data. Instead of me taking 40 plus hours of work to do that, I can now do that in a couple of minutes. Now the AI is just summarizing it, right? And saying, hey, do I want to go down this road and devote that kind of time, money, manpower, and resources to that? But it's not doing the whole cycle, right? Like you still got to have a human in the loop. So from a, writing perspective, I think the same thing. Like you still got to be able to do it yourself, because there were plenty of times we were in environments where, hey man, I didn't have nothing but pen, paper, and personality when I sat down in a meet, right, or did something. I definitely didn't have like internet access or direct, use of any kind of tool like AI or anything like that. So you got to be prepared to be able to still do it the old-fashioned way. If you got AI, great. And that means you'll just go 10 times faster. But to your point, if you only know how to use AI and AI fails, you're going to die executing that op order trying to get up that hill.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing that I think about it is, there's a lot of bias in the way that learning AI is in some form adverse than learning other ways of doing things. And it's because people are scared of it. And I understand that. I am scared of it, even though I'm forced to integrate it into everything that I do in the commercial sector. But we're going to move forward, and it's going to move fast. Think of, interrogations, or even as a police officer with the mandatory cameras on them, the entire action's already written. There's no writing. It's already done. The second that he gets out of the car and starts moving and the camera starts going, everything is documented. Everything is written. It's already in the database by the time he gets back into his car and moves on to the next thing. And that's just where it's going to go. It's whether the art is being lost or is a bad thing or not, I don't really know. I think it's just fundamentally shifting. And it's going to shift faster than anybody's comfortable, especially the elderly.
Yeah, and I think that was the point I was trying to make is, how do we pull in these other data streams to augment what we would normally do with a narrative in a report, right? And to Dan's point, I think that's a great example, body cams. The report is already written by the time you get back. And I know we just lost one, but raise your hand if you were ever in a place where you thought that your dossier and your operational caseload was not enough, right? So to say that it could endanger critical thinking, I see your point there, but I also think that what it is as a tool is it frees you up to go back, and instead of throwing 3 dips in and having a pot of coffee as you're finishing your 5th or 6th report for that day, is now you have time that I can sit down with my CI referent. Now I can, in the corporate world, I can sit down with my other security professionals. I can sit down with my executives and take that time and energy and dedicate that to critical thinking in a greater schema, right, of the organization that you exist in. I think that's the real value that's being added. To your point about it being inherently insecure, I would mostly agree. Current employments of AI are mostly insecure. A lot of us in the commercial world and the DoD and the government, we're using commercially owned and operated models. The government is taking a position where we just need to have this thing exist in an enclave that isn't being touched. How you feel about that? Okay, we could have a whole debate about that. But there are certain technologies out there that are helping people apply those structures, at the enterprise level very smartly. Realizing, that there are technologies, specifically privacy enhancing technologies. I happen to used to work for a company that did this, but how can I run this model over commercial data without leaving my breadcrumbs of, what I'm asking it and how I'm interacting with it for anybody to go find and to correlate. And even the companies that own this, for that matter, what levels of managed attribution, obscuring the questions being asked, can I apply to this so that I can interact with, not only my pool of sensitive data, all this other reporting, but what exists out there in the open internet in a secure way. The last question I would offer on this topic is, what does the perfect operation look like? And so when we're talking about AI is just a calculation of all the inputs that has been given with context clues along the logic layers to give you the answer that it thinks that you best want. Well, my question to the community would be, what does the perfect operation look like? How do we define that in order to feed into a model in order to even help us along the way? Good luck answering that question.
Don't ask the lawyers. Don't ask the lawyers. Don't get them involved at all, ever.
Yeah, to your point, on the corporate side, that's going to be even more difficult, right? Because what master are you answering to?
Yeah. Well, guys, this has been a fascinating conversation. We're hitting the 2-hour mark. We already had one casualty. So I think this is a good place to hit pause and maybe set it up for a round two in a few weeks. Let everybody's brain cool down a little bit. But I want to thank y'all so much for taking the time out on a Saturday to share your thoughts, to be on this panel discussion. And I'll toss it around the horn for just final thoughts for this session, and then queue it up for the next one. So Dan, we'll start with you, then we'll go to Damon, and we'll finish up with Mike and Jeremy.
Sure. If you want to do counterintelligence, learn the difference between Marine Corps, Army, Navy, and Air Force, and make a decision once you've been informed of all of them. They're all awesome branches with great opportunities. No one is better than the others. But other than that, yeah, learn the branch, learn the craft. A lot of it's the same. Individual experiences may vary.
I would say it's the most diverse field that you can have, right? You could do, who was it? Nick's the SIGINT guy, right? I think originally, or something like that. Like you can do counterintelligence, but it could be SIGINT, right? Like as long as it's countering, right, red's understanding of blue, it can be counterintelligence. It is very diverse. It is ever changing. I think it's an amazing field to be in. And to all my diehard humiters out there, I will tell you from a case officer perspective, doing off-goes harder than just doing straight leg humit. Again, the only assumption you can really ever make is they're as good as you or better, right, on the other side. And you can't really say that, on the humit side. I've worked some humit sources that were tactically relevant for about long enough to smoke a cigarette, right? And then not much after that. But, from a strategic counterintelligence perspective, it's very, very hard to say that is not a long-term strategic priority and way more difficult.
Yeah, I love Damon's answer. I'm in full agreement. There's so many different flavors of CI out there. And there's not a whole lot of ways in which you can't take a CI mindset and apply it to another business function or any organizational function and find some success in just having that mindset. And then the last thing I'll say is I look forward to a joint discussion panel so we can really pull the daggers out and get after it.
Mike, I love that idea, joint discussion, and we could talk about just the different authorities to put a bow on what Dan said and why all the services are great. I think that would be a fascinating discussion. Gentlemen, thank you for your time, not just on a Saturday afternoon, but your service. The time and dedication you put into mastering a craft, and not just one craft, but two, because you guys do it dual-hatted. And then your knowledge and sharing the answers with your questions and your responses to those questions from our audience. To our audience out there, again, y'all need to check these episodes out. There's a wealth of knowledge. Everybody's journey is amazing. You can listen to Mike's episode number 40, Dan's episode at 90, Damon's episode at 95, and Nick's episode at 106. You can also check out our website, www.ixnsolutions.com, for some more information. We've got a new product line, so it's pretty awesome. Take a look at it. But thanks again for giving us a listen. And Ryan, over to you.
Yeah, and we'll close it out the way we always do. Remember R3, recognize, react, report. Recognize whenever a threat or risk presents itself, react to it appropriately, and then report it to security professionals so we can take action against it. And with that, thank you so much. We look forward to the next time.